Humanity was still the new kid on the block, the underdog among the stars. The galaxy was full of civilizations older, wiser, and more advanced than Earth could ever imagine. But there was one thing that set humanity apart. They had a fire within them. When their enemies struck, they didn't cower. They fought back with everything they had. And when the Deathworlders entered the fray, they changed everything. It all started with a series of mysterious attacks. Unprovoked, ruthless, and swift, alien forces struck first, using their superior technology to bring entire colonies to their knees. Earth had barely recovered from the scars of war, and now, these ancient enemies sought to crush humanity's spark before it could even fully ignite. But they underestimated one thing: the sheer willpower of the human spirit. The Deathworlders were the first to recognize the potential of humanity. These were not ordinary warriors. They came from planets where survival was a battle every single day. Their world had created the toughest, most relentless creatures known to the galaxy. They were a race born from the fires of constant struggle, and they saw in humans a kindred spirit, a species forged in adversity, ready to unleash its fury when pushed too far. But no one could have predicted what would come next. When the Deathworlders arrived, they didn't come in peace. They came with weapons, with knowledge, and with a promise that they would help humanity strike back. They trained humans in ways no one thought possible, pushing them beyond their limits. It wasn't just about the technology or tactics. It was about awakening the fire within. It was about teaching them to survive and fight like never before. The galaxy was about to find out what happens when a species with nothing left to lose finally rises to take control. As Earth's defenders began to stand tall, the tide of war slowly shifted. For the first time, the enemies who had thought of humanity as weak began to fear what they had created. It wasn't just the advanced tech or the powerful weapons that made the Deathworlders so formidable. It was the raw, unrelenting fury of a species pushed to the brink. The humans fought not just to survive, but to prove they belonged among the stars. But the war was far from over. The enemy had only just begun to reveal the true extent of their power, and the Deathworlders had not yet shown all their cards. As humanity's champions geared up for the next battle, the question remained: could they truly defeat an enemy so powerful, so cunning, and so relentless? The forces of the galaxy were about to clash in a way that no one had ever imagined. As the next wave of attacks loomed closer, the fate of humanity would be decided in ways no one could foresee. And just when the fight seemed to tip in humanity's favor, something unexpected happened. The skies darkened as a new, even more dangerous force appeared on the horizon, ready to turn everything upside down. What could this new threat be? What would it mean for the Deathworlders and the humans fighting alongside them? The new threat loomed like a shadow in the distance. Its arrival felt across the galaxy. The usual warnings, interceptions, signals, and data streams had gone silent. It was almost as if the enemy had simply vanished. No one knew what it was, but the silence spoke louder than any weapon could. The forces that had once seemed so confident in their superiority were suddenly on edge, whispering rumors of a force even deadlier than the Deathworlders. There were no answers, only questions. The Deathworlders, ever the enigma, had their own suspicions. They'd been training humanity for months, teaching them the ancient ways of survival. But even they, with all their experience and knowledge, seemed uncertain. The strange shift in the stars was more than just a simple anomaly. It was a signal that something was coming, something they were not ready for. And then there was the message. A coded transmission intercepted by Earth's command center, encrypted and almost untraceable, appeared in the dead of night. The words were simple, but chilling. It has arrived. No one could understand it. The message gave no clues as to who sent it or what it meant. It was too cryptic, too vague. But the weight of it was unmistakable. Everyone knew this was no ordinary transmission. This was a warning, a countdown of sorts. The enemy that had previously laid waste to humanity's colonies was now on the verge of something worse. Whatever was coming, It would be far beyond the kind of battle the Deathworlders had prepared them for. In the midst of all this uncertainty, there was one group that began to take notice: the humans who had fought beside the Deathworlders, the ones who had been trained in the harshest of conditions, who had fought tooth and nail to defend their world. They were beginning to sense that the time for survival was coming to an end. There would be no more training, no more preparation. It was time to face the darkness head-on. One such warrior stood at the edge of a military outpost, gazing out at the distant horizon, a storm of emotions swirling within. Their hands gripped tightly around the weapon they had learned to wield with deadly precision. The training had been brutal, pushing them to the brink of exhaustion and beyond. But they were ready. They had to be. For Earth, for humanity, and for the people they had lost along the way. They didn't know exactly what was coming, but they knew it was not going to be easy. And yet, in the pit of their stomach, there was something more, something deep and unsettling. A feeling that perhaps they had not been told everything. The Deathworlders were skilled at hiding their true intentions, and even after all the time spent training alongside them, there were still things about them that didn't add up. It was clear. The Deathworlders were not simply fighting to protect humanity. They had their own reasons for joining the war. There were whispers among the ranks, rumors that the Deathworlders had a long-standing feud with the new enemy, a conflict that ran deeper than any of the humans could comprehend. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was personal for them. As the horizon grew darker, so did the sense of impending doom. The messages had stopped. The ships had gone silent. It was as if the enemy was waiting, watching, biding their time. And then, without warning, the first wave struck. It wasn't what anyone expected. No mass ships, no fleets of weaponized ships descending upon the planet. It was worse, much worse. A single massive object emerged from the depths of space, its silhouette dark against the stars. The sheer size of it sent ripples of dread through the command centers on Earth. It wasn't just a weapon. It was something far more sinister, something that defied all logic. Its intentions were unclear, but its presence was undeniable. As Earth's forces scrambled to mobilize, the question on everyone's mind was simple. Who, or what, was in control of that vessel? And more importantly, what did they want? The countdown had begun, and there was no turning back. Earth stood at the precipice, unaware of the storm that was about to engulf them. The planet was on edge. The sudden arrival of the massive, shadowed vessel cast a pall over humanity's fragile sense of safety. Earth's defense forces scrambled to understand what they were facing, but all their attempts at communication were met with static silence. For weeks, there had been no sign of any incoming fleet, no movement to indicate a traditional military strike. Instead, this monolith of metal and fear had just appeared, hovering at the edge of their solar system, like some ancient predator awaiting its prey. Rumors swirled about the Deathworlders' secretive past, with some humans growing uneasy about their true motivations. Had they known this was coming? Were they, in fact, using Earth as a pawn in a larger game? The questions began to grow louder. After all, they'd fought side by side, but the Deathworlders had been strangely tight-lipped about their history with the new enemy. Was this their battle first, and humanity simply a tool to achieve some unknown goal? The tension between the humans and the Deathworlders reached a boiling point, especially among those who had fought on the front lines. They'd trained for months, faced horrors they couldn't unsee, but the truth was that they were still rookies when it came to the ways of intergalactic war, and they had come to trust the Deathworlders, perhaps too easily. But now, standing face to face with the unknown, the fear of betrayal began to seep in. One human soldier, a woman who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer, began to question her role. She had been part of the team to infiltrate an enemy ship months earlier, only to discover the disturbing truth about the Deathworlders' relationship with the mysterious force. But the truth had been lost in the chaos of the fight, a fragmented glimpse into something far darker. The higher-ups had silenced the report, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something far bigger than herself. As the strange craft loomed ever closer, another faction of humanity's elite soldiers prepared to mount a counterattack. This group, known for their rapid response units, had already experienced first contact with the new enemy. Except, it wasn't quite like anything they'd expected. The first few skirmishes had been odd, quick, precise strikes against their defenses. The enemy seemed to know exactly where to hit, how to hit, and more importantly, when to pull back. There were no casualties, only confusion. But then, the first casualty arrived in the form of an unmarked data capsule. The capsule contained a chilling message that was brief, but clear. You are not the first. You are not the last. It was enough to send a wave of panic through the ranks. They didn't know if it was a threat or some kind of warning, but there was no doubt in their minds that the enemy's strategy was far more calculated than anyone had expected. The terrifying realization began to set in. What if Earth had simply been a stepping stone for something far worse? Meanwhile, deep within the halls of Earth's command center, a high-ranking officer stared at the swirling data on the screens. His face, usually calm and composed, was etched with lines of concern. The transmissions had stopped coming from the far reaches of the solar system, and there had been no indication of what the next move would be. The Deathworlders had offered help, but that offer came with strings attached. Strings no one had dared to ask about. Had they known this threat was coming? And if so, why hadn't they told humanity the full story? There was one man, an older officer, who had once worked closely with the Deathworlders. He had the answers, if only he could be found before it was too late. The truth was becoming increasingly elusive. Everyone had their own theories about the Deathworlders, about the enemy, about what lay hidden in the darkness of space. But no one truly knew anything for certain. What had started as a war for survival had spiraled into a fight for control of the galaxy itself. And now, as the strange vessel's dark form neared Earth's atmosphere, all anyone could do was wait. Then, just as Earth's defenses braced for the worst, a new signal burst through the static. It was faint, distorted, but unmistakable. A voice that didn't belong to anyone on Earth or the Deathworlders. The words were broken, filled with static, but the message was clear enough to send a shiver down the spine of everyone listening. We've been watching. Your fight is just beginning. The unknown force wasn't just coming for Earth. It was coming for everyone. And in that moment, no one had any idea who would survive the war to come. The countdown had begun, and this time, there would be no turning back. The darkness outside Earth's atmosphere deepened, stretching across the stars like a massive shroud. The mysterious vessel loomed closer, its shape now unmistakably visible against the blackness. It wasn't just large. It was enormous, far larger than anything Earth scientists had ever cataloged, far beyond any technology they had ever dreamed of. It didn't belong to any known species. It was alien, terrifying, and for reasons no one could explain, seemed to be waiting. Inside the command centers scattered across Earth, the air crackled with tension. Every person who had fought, every soldier who had prepared for this moment, was now looking up at the same sky, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. But the unknowns kept multiplying. No one had expected the silence that followed the cryptic transmission. The message hadn't offered any clarity. It had only raised more questions. Your fight is just beginning. What did it mean? Who had sent it? And more importantly, why had they waited until now to strike? As the hours passed, military officers huddled over plans, preparing Earth's final defense. The Deathworlders, their stoic faces revealing little emotion, stood side by side with humans in the war rooms, their eyes locked on the strange vessel. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. Their bodies had seen enough battles to know the signs of an impending storm. They were ready to fight. But ready for what? What kind of battle could this be when no one knew what they were up against? A small team of specialists, led by a man who had once been a part of the first human forays into space, was tasked with deciphering the alien transmissions. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as they tried to crack the code. Each keystroke felt like it was drawing them closer to something terrible, something they were not ready to face. The unknown message continued to pulse in the background, growing more persistent as they approached a breakthrough. But just when it seemed they might find an answer, the signal abruptly cut off, leaving only a sense of dread in its wake. It was then that the sky trembled. Earth's defense systems detected a shift, a sudden increase in energy. The massive vessel was no longer hovering. It was descending, and fast. Panic spread through the ranks as emergency protocols were initiated. It didn't matter that Earth's fleet was preparing for a fight. This was something different. This wasn't just another enemy fleet coming for conquest. The descent of the ship felt like an omen, an inevitability. Something was coming that was bigger than anything humanity had ever faced. Among the human soldiers, fear began to grow. They had trained for war, yes, but not for this. Not for an enemy that seemed to play by rules no one understood. One soldier, a veteran who had survived countless battles, muttered to himself as he watched the vessel fall. "It's not a war, it's a reckoning." Suddenly, the first explosion rang out. It wasn't from the alien ship. It came from Earth's own defenses. A malfunction. Or was it sabotage? The blast shook the ground, sending shockwaves through the command center. Panic spread as alarms blared across every station. The countdown had begun, but this wasn't the controlled military response they had prepared for. This was chaos, and it was escalating rapidly. Through the chaos, a small group of humans, led by a commander who had once placed his trust in the Deathworlders, began to realize the gravity of their situation. Something had been set in motion long before the first attack. This new alien force, the one now descending upon them, was not a new player. It was something older, something far more dangerous. This wasn't the beginning of a war. It was the end of something much bigger. The Deathworlders, with their unshakable resolve, stepped forward, their eyes hard as stone. They had seen this kind of destruction before. They knew what was coming, and they weren't afraid. But the humans were different. They had no history with this kind of devastation. They had no experience in facing a power like this, and as the vessel drew closer, the commander knew there would be no easy victory this time, not without answers, not without knowing who had triggered this and why. As the first wave of enemy ships began to emerge from the massive vessel, humanity's forces prepared for the worst. The skies lit up with weapon fire, and the ground trembled beneath the force of explosions. But it wasn't just the physical battle that haunted everyone. It was the silence, the chilling thought that they had all been led into something far bigger than any of them could comprehend. And then, just as it seemed the battle was about to reach its peak, something unexpected happened. The Deathworlders' leader, the one who had guided humanity through their darkest hours, stepped forward, his face unreadable. He raised a hand, signaling for everyone to hold their positions. And in that moment, the entire world seemed to freeze. "What is it?" the commander asked, his voice trembling slightly with uncertainty. The Deathworlder didn't answer. Instead, he simply looked up at the ship, as if it held the answer to questions none of them were ready to ask. The tension in the air was suffocating. Then the ship released a blast of light so bright, so intense, that it seemed to burn through the very fabric of space itself. The blinding light from the massive ship stretched across the horizon, its intensity consuming everything in its path. For a moment, it felt like the entire world had been ripped apart. Soldiers on the ground shielded their eyes, their bodies frozen in place, as if the very air had been stolen from them. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the light vanished, leaving an eerie, almost suffocating silence in its wake. No one knew what had just happened, but the effects were immediate. Communications were down. Power flickered and surged, leaving entire sectors of Earth's defenses blind and vulnerable. It was as if the universe itself had paused, holding its breath. The enemy ship had not fired a weapon. At least not in the way anyone had expected. No explosions, no direct assault. Instead, it had unleashed a wave of energy so vast, so concentrated, that it seemed to distort reality itself. The ground beneath their feet trembled, not from a bomb or an attack, but from something deeper, something more unsettling. It felt like the planet was shaking in response to the sheer force that had just been unleashed. Humanity's command centers were now nothing more than smoke and rubble, the chaos unfolding too rapidly to keep track of. The system was failing. As the smoke cleared, the skies revealed something far more terrifying than anyone had anticipated. It wasn't just an alien invasion. The ship was not alone. Emerging from the dark expanse behind it were hundreds, no, thousands, of smaller vessels. But these ships weren't like anything Earth's forces had seen before. They weren't shaped like traditional spacecraft. They seemed alive, pulsing with a strange, organic energy. They didn't just descend. They materialized, as if they were being born from the fabric of space itself. In the midst of the confusion, the human soldier who had once been haunted by the cryptic message, "You are not the first. You are not the last," was now at the center of a terrifying realization. These weren't just invaders. They were part of something much bigger, something that spanned the vastness of the galaxy, perhaps even the universe itself. The message had been a warning, but it had also been a promise. Humanity was not alone in this war, and what they had feared was far worse than anything they could have imagined. The Deathworlders, despite their resilience, looked shaken. They had prepared for many things, but not this. There had always been a code among their kind: fight, survive, and never show weakness. Yet, as they stood before the massive armada, even they hesitated. Something was unfolding in front of them, something beyond their understanding. It was then that the commander, the human who had fought beside the Deathworlders and had trusted them implicitly, noticed the subtle shift in their behavior. For the first time since the Deathworlders had arrived, there was no unity in their ranks. They exchanged glances, not with the usual determination, but with something deeper: fear. The realization hit him like a slap. The Deathworlders knew more than they had let on. They were no mere warriors in this fight. They were players in a much larger, far more dangerous game. Before the commander could voice his concerns, the skies erupted in a chorus of thunderous roars. The alien ships began to move, their unnatural shapes twisting and reshaping as they deployed their weapons. It was not a traditional attack. It was something organic, alive, as if the ships themselves were extensions of the very force that had arrived with them. Earth's defenses were decimated in an instant, their weapons useless against this new threat. The organic vessels seemed to absorb the blasts, their exterior shifting in response to each attack. But it wasn't just the technology that made the situation worse. It was the enemy's methodical, relentless approach. The ships didn't need to overwhelm the humans with sheer numbers. They were picking them off one by one, isolating them in their desperation. The battlefield, once chaotic with hope, had now turned into a deadly game of survival. Every move made by the human forces seemed to be anticipated, as if the enemy could read their every action before it happened. In the midst of the destruction, the soldier, the one who had once questioned everything about their alliance, found herself face to face with something impossible. An alien, tall and angular, stepped from one of the organic ships, its form shimmering as though it were part of the very air itself. Its eyes were ancient, filled with knowledge far beyond human comprehension. The being spoke, its voice not heard, but felt deep within her mind. "This is only the beginning. You were never meant to win." The words hit like a wave of cold dread. She had thought the enemy came for Earth. She had thought they were fighting to survive, to protect humanity from some ancient threat. But now, the full scope of the conflict was becoming clear. This was no mere battle for survival. This was a war for control of the very fabric of the galaxy itself, a war that had been set in motion long before humanity had even learned to walk among the stars. The Deathworlders were not just fighting alongside humanity. They were part of something bigger, a much older struggle. The question now was not whether they would win, but whether they could even understand what they were fighting for before it was too late. As the soldier stood there, staring at the alien entity, her thoughts raced. She had been wrong all along. The real fight wasn't against the invaders. It was against the very forces that had orchestrated everything, from the first attack to the rise of the Deathworlders themselves. The truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined, and as the alien being's gaze locked with hers, a chilling thought struck her. The end of humanity's story was already written, but would they even live long enough to read it? The ground trembled once again, this time with a greater force, and the skies seemed to grow darker still. The battlefield was chaos incarnate. The skies had been ripped open with the flashes of laser fire, and the ground was a jagged, scared wasteland. Earth's forces, already broken and scattered, had retreated into what little was left of their defense zones. The alien ships, now swarming the sky like a horde of predators, didn't hesitate. They advanced relentlessly, their organic vessels consuming everything in their path. And the Deathworlders, who had once stood tall beside humanity, were now fractured, unsure of their place in this war that had grown far beyond their comprehension. Amidst the devastation, the soldier, the one who had once questioned everything, stood at the front lines, her weapon heavy in her hands. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. The truth had hit too late. This wasn't just a war for Earth's survival. This was a war for the galaxy itself, a battle against forces that had been weaving their schemes for eons, far before humanity had ever stepped foot in the stars. The Deathworlders weren't allies. They were soldiers caught in the middle of a much larger cosmic struggle, just as powerless as humanity to stop what was coming. As the alien ships descended further, the being she had encountered earlier stood once again, towering over the wreckage. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, predatory intelligence. "You still don't understand," it whispered, its voice chillingly calm. "This has never been about you. It's about us, about the power we control. You are but pawns in a game far older than you could ever fathom." For a split second, the soldier felt the weight of the universe itself pressing down on her. Her mind spun with the realization that all of this, all of it, had been orchestrated. The enemy's strategy was too precise, too deliberate. Earth had never stood a chance. But as the being's words echoed in her mind, something snapped inside her. Pawns. She refused to accept that. She wasn't a pawn. She was a human being, and Earth wasn't just a stepping stone in someone else's war. Without thinking, she raised her weapon, her finger trembling but steady as she fired. The blast struck the alien being, and for a moment, it seemed like it was going to fall. But then, it absorbed the energy, its form shifting and warping like liquid. "You think you can fight me," it said, voice tinged with disdain. But in that moment, the air around them crackled with a new energy. The Deathworlders, led by their leader, surged forward, their forms cloaked in an aura of raw power. The leader's voice rang out, commanding their forces to attack. The ground shook as their combined might tore through the alien defenses. They were using a tactic they hadn't shown before, an energy pulse, one that could counter the alien technology's unique ability to absorb attacks. The battlefield, once chaotic and hopeless, now became a battleground for a different kind of fight. The Deathworlders fought fiercely, side by side with the humans. But it wasn't just about strength anymore. It was about outsmarting the enemy. The alien beings had underestimated the human spirit, the unexpected creativity that came with being caught off guard. The unexpected, the unknown, was humanity's greatest weapon. It was their wild card. The soldier, leading the small unit, reached the heart of the enemy's formation, where the organic ship pulsed with energy. She knew that destroying it would bring an end to the invasion, but it wouldn't be easy. The alien forces fought back viciously, but she pressed forward, determined to end it. It wasn't just a fight for survival now. It was a fight for the future. for humanity's place in the stars. And just as she was about to breach the ship's core, the unexpected happened. A voice, familiar yet distant, echoed through her mind. "You can't stop it. You weren't meant to." The soldier froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was the Deathworlder leader. But what he said next would change everything. "I'm not who you think I am." Time seemed to stop. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. The Deathworlder leader wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't even a general. He was something else entirely. A key player in the very war that had brought the aliens to Earth in the first place. The Deathworlders hadn't come to help humanity. They had come to prepare it for what was to come. They had been lying. The galaxy wasn't their home. It was their battleground. The soldier's hand shook as she faced the truth. She had been manipulated all along. The Deathworlders' purpose had never been to save Earth. They had been sent to pave the way for the arrival of these alien beings, to ensure that humanity would fight, because the real war was just beginning. The battle on Earth was only one chapter in a much larger story, and humanity had just been caught in the middle. Before she could process the gravity of this revelation, the alien forces began to close in once again, their ships descending like a flood. The sky grew darker, the air heavier. The final showdown was moments away, but now, everything had changed. The soldier knew she couldn't trust anyone, not even the Deathworlders. And as the first wave of energy blasts tore through the battlefield, she had to decide. Could humanity stand on its own, or had they already lost to forces far beyond their control? The world trembled beneath them as the final blow drew near. The soldier's weapon clicked, the battle reaching its critical moment. But before she could act, a massive shadow fell over the battlefield, eclipsing the sun, signaling something much worse. A new fleet, larger than anything they had seen, emerged from the dark void of space. And this time, it wasn't just a fight for Earth, it was a fight for the very soul of the galaxy itself. The final wave of enemy ships loomed overhead, casting a shadow over the Earth that seemed to suffocate everything below. Humanity's forces, battered and broken, had no more answers. The skies were filled with the remnants of their final resistance, the once powerful fleet now in tatters, and the ground was littered with the wreckage of their last stand. The Deathworlders, too, were scattered, each one fighting for their own survival, their earlier unity now fractured by the revelation of their true purpose. Trust had crumbled, and with it, any hope of an easy victory. But amid the chaos, the soldier stood still, her weapon lowered. The final confrontation was upon them, but something deep inside her told her that this battle wasn't about brute strength. It was about something more, something within humanity itself. She had seen the will to survive, the refusal to give in the faces of her comrades. She had seen it in the Deathworlders, too, despite the lies they had woven around them. There was something unquantifiable about the human spirit, something that couldn't be manipulated, something that couldn't be predicted. And it was that very spirit that would decide the outcome of this war. As the massive shadow of the enemy fleet passed over them, something unexpected happened. The Deathworlder leader, the one who had been revealed as an orchestrator in the larger galactic conflict, stepped forward. His eyes, once filled with the cold precision of a soldier, now held something different, remorse. His voice, when it came, was soft, almost regretful. "I have made a mistake," he said. "This war was never meant to be fought this way. You, humans, are not the pawns we believed you to be. You are the key." His words were a shock, and for a brief moment, the battle slowed as both sides tried to understand what he meant. The aliens, too, had paused, their ships seemingly waiting for something, perhaps expecting a decision to be made. It was then that the soldier realized the true nature of their enemy. The conflict wasn't about domination. It was about control over the galaxy's future. The alien force wasn't interested in wiping out humanity. They were testing them, pushing them to their limits to see if they were worthy of joining an ancient galactic network of civilizations that had existed long before Earth even dreamed of the stars. The Deathworlder leader turned to her, his face lined with the weight of centuries of knowledge. "It's not too late," he said. "You can still prove your worth." With that, the soldier made a choice that would forever change the course of history. She rallied the survivors, human and Deathworlder alike, and together they fought not just to survive, but to prove that humanity's place in the galaxy was earned, not given. They fought not for the battle at hand, but for a future they could shape, one where Earth wouldn't be the victim of cosmic powers, but a force of its own. The final moments of the battle were intense. The human forces, using tactics and innovation that had stunned even the Deathworlders, launched a coordinated strike against the heart of the alien fleet. It was a fight for survival, but it was also a statement, a declaration that humanity was more than capable of standing on its own. The once dominant alien forces, caught off guard by the tenacity and ingenuity of Earth's fighters, faltered. As the last of the alien ships fell from the sky, the silence that followed was overwhelming. Earth's defenders had won, against all odds, against the cosmic powers that had intended to crush them. But the victory felt bittersweet. The war had not been won on a battlefield. It had been won in the hearts of those who refused to give in. The Deathworlders, standing among the humans now, knew that this was a new beginning, not just for Earth, but for the galaxy. The ancient struggle wasn't over, but humanity had proven something essential, that they were not just survivors, but players in a far larger game. The Deathworlders, once cold and distant, now looked to the humans with newfound respect. The soldier, standing amid the remnants of the war, looked up at the stars. The universe had changed, and so had humanity. The price of survival had been steep, but in the end, humanity had shown that no matter how vast or powerful the enemy, they would always fight to the very last breath. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, humanity stood on equal footing with the galaxy's most ancient and powerful civilizations. And as she turned to join the others, the soldier understood one final truth. This was just the beginning. The story of humanity, of its rise to prominence in a galaxy teeming with both hope and danger, had only just begun.